Is this a weapon designed to sever flesh? Or is it an instrument intended to amputate a moment from history? We are often taught that time is a river, fluid, continuous, and unidirectional. But the artifact secured within this stasis field suggests a far more violent hydrology. It suggests that time can be frozen, shattered, and honed into an edge. This claymore is the sole recovery from the temporal schism of Sector 9. A relic of a war fought not over territory, but over the sequence of cause and effect. Let us break the seal on the containment unit and document what remains. Upon visual inspection, the object presents a jarring dichotomy of materials. The hilt is primitive, almost disappointingly mundane. It is constructed from a low-carbon ferrous alloy, roughly forged and heavily pitted by standard oxidation. The leather grip has rotted away, leaving only the desiccated remnants of the binding wire. Radiocarbon dating of the trapped organic particulate in the pommel places the handle's manufacture at approximately 1200 years ago, consistent with a pre-industrial, feudal society. However, the blade is an impossibility. Reference Plate 1a. Note the way the laboratory light behaves as it strikes the glass. It does not reflect. It does not refract in accordance with Snell's law. Instead, the light seems to become trapped, looping infinitely within the crystalline structure. The blade is not transparent. It is a prism of captured duration. We initially classified this material as a hyper-dense silicate, perhaps fused by orbital bombardment. But when we attempted to take a core sample, the diamond-tipped drill bit did not scratch the surface. It simply vanished. The tip of the drill was not broken, it was displaced. It was sent, microscopically, into the past. We now hypothesize that this blade is not matter in the traditional sense. It is a crystallized event horizon. The civilization that forged this weapon possessed the technology to isolate a single nanosecond of time, a moment of absolute high-energy stasis, and compress it into a solid state. They took a pause in the universe and hammered it into a sword. The visual evidence for this theory is found in the blade's shadow. Observe the floor of the containment chamber. The hilt casts a sharp, distinct shadow under the overhead halogen. The blade, however, casts a shadow that flickers. If you watch closely, the shadow lags behind the movement of the object by exactly 3 seconds. The light passing through the blade is being delayed, detained within the temporal lattice of the crystal before being released. To look through this sword is to look into the immediate past. This anomaly extends to the edge geometry. Under the electron microscope, the cutting edge does not terminate in atoms. It terminates in a vacuum. There is no molecular roughness because the edge exists on a subatomic boundary layer between now and then. It is infinitely sharp because it is not cutting with matter. It is cutting with the shear force of a temporal discontinuity. The excavation context of the artifact supports this terrifying conclusion. We found this claymore in the center of a blast crater that showed no signs of thermal impact. There was no charring, no radiation. Instead, the soil within a 50-meter radius had been aged instantaneously. The granite bedrock had turned to dust, and the surrounding vegetation had withered and fossilized in the span of a heartbeat. The weapon was found driven into the stone, humming with a low-frequency resonance that our audio sensors interpreted as the sound of a clock ticking at infinite speed. I find it unsettling to stand this close to it. Even through the lead glass of the observation deck, one feels a sense of vertigo. It is not a magnetic field, it is the sensation of one's own biological rhythm falling out of sync. The heart wants to beat faster, the lungs want to inhale before they have exhaled. The claymore is a localized rejection of the laws of physics, a jagged shard of time that refuses to flow. Moving from the static crystallography to the kinetic application, we must ask, how does one weaponize a frozen second? To answer this, we authorized a Series 9 ballistic test using the artifact. The results were not merely destructive, they were theoretically impossible. Standard melee weapons operate on the principle of mechanical separation, a wedge driving apart matter. The Glass-Shard Claymore, however, operates on the principle of chronometric severance. When the blade is swung, it does not merely pass through the air, it creates a drag in the local temporal flow. It pulls the now into the then. Reference the high-speed footage from Test Chamber B. Pay close attention to the timestamp in the lower right quadrant. We are filming at 10,000 frames per second. At frame 4.000, the wielder begins the downstroke. At frame 4.050, the blade is still 12 inches from the ballistic gel target. But look at the target. At frame 4.051, before physical contact is made, the wound appears. This is the terrifying reality of retro-causal combat. The blade possesses a temporal reach that exceeds its physical dimensions, because the crystal is composed of a captured moment from the past. It interacts with the target's timeline before it interacts with the target's biology. The effect precedes the cause. In a duel, this renders conventional reflexes obsolete. A soldier attempting to parry this weapon would find themselves bleeding from a strike that has not yet landed. They are not fighting a sword, they are fighting a predetermined outcome. The nature of the trauma itself is equally anomalous. When we examine the damage to the ballistic torso, we do not find the clean, wet incision associated with steel blades. Instead, the wound channel is desiccated. The flesh at the point of impact has not been cut, it has been aged to the point of disintegration. The blade essentially steals the time that the tissue was supposed to have. It exiles that specific cross-section of biology into the deep past. The result is what we have classified as an instantaneous necrotic furrow. The cells bordering the cut show signs of cellular senescence equivalent to 50 years of aging, occurring in a nanosecond. To be struck by this claymore is to have a part of your body die of old age in the blink of an eye. I find the tactical implications of this mechanism profoundly disturbing. We found treatises in the ruins, preserved on stone tablets, as paper would likely crumble near these weapons, describing the art of the echo. The warriors trained to use these blades did not aim for the body of the opponent. They aimed for the space the opponent was about to occupy. They were taught to sever the future. Consider the psychological impact on the victim. Imagine seeing an arm wither and turn to dust before you even feel the impact of the blow. It creates a battlefield dynamic where the visual confirmation of the strike is irrelevant. Pain becomes a prophecy. Furthermore, our testing revealed a radioactive byproduct of this temporal friction. We call it entropic ash. Every time the blade cuts, it releases a burst of temporal waste, seconds that were severed and left to rot. This manifests as a gray, grit-like substance that coats the wound and the wielder alike. Analysis shows this ash is composed of unstable carbon isotopes. It is the residue of a timeline that was aborted. The wielders of these weapons were not immune to this radiation. Skeletal remains found near the crater, presumably the user of this specific artifact, showed asymmetrical aging. The right arm, the sword arm, belonged to a human of perhaps 90 years. The left arm belonged to a human of 20. The claymore does not just take time from the victim, it leaks time onto the user. This suggests that the glass shard is not a sealed system. It is a leaking battery of causality. Every swing widens the crack in the containment of the event horizon. It forces us to re-evaluate the hilt, that crude iron handle. It was not just a grip, it was a grounding rod. A desperate attempt to anchor the wielder in the present while they held a piece of the past. We attempted one final experiment to test the depth of the cut. We placed a solid block of granite in the testing chamber and had the mechanical arm swing the claymore with maximum force. The blade passed through the stone with zero resistance, as if the rock were mist. But the rock did not split. Instead, the two halves simply ceased to be part of the same geological era. The left half retained its current quartz structure. The right half reverted to a metamorphic slurry, effectively devolving millions of years in geology. The sword had cut the history of the stone. This confirms that the weapon functions on a concept of timeline amputation. It does not matter how thick your armor is, or how dense your shield. If the armor exists in time, it can be bypassed. The only defense against such a weapon is to not exist at the moment the strike is delivered. It turns combat into a metaphysical gamble, where existence itself is the stake. The inevitable conclusion of waging war with retro-causal ballistics is not victory, but incoherence. The civilization that forged the Glass-Shard Claymore did not fall due to invasion or resource depletion. They fell because they severed the narrative thread of their own history. We call this phenomenon chronological fragmentation. When a single claymore is used, It creates a micro-fissure in the local timeline. But the archaeological evidence suggests that during the Glass era, thousands of these weapons were deployed simultaneously in open conflict. The cumulative effect of so many timeline amputations created a battlefield where the sequence of events shattered. Monday did not necessarily follow Sunday. Cause did not necessarily precede effect. Reference the geological anomaly of Sector 9, which we have termed jigsaw stratigraphy. In a standard excavation, we find the oldest layers at the bottom and the newest at the top. Here, the layers are randomized. We found Bronze Age pottery shards fused inside the chassis of a fusion reactor. We found skeletons wearing high polymer combat armor clutching flint spears. The excessive use of the claymores churned the soil of time itself, mixing eras together like a deck of cards shuffled by a madman. I find the plight of the civilians during this collapse particularly harrowing. Diaries recovered from the periphery, written on sheets of metal to survive the flux, describe the onset of temporal fatigue. Citizens would wake up in the evening and go to sleep in the morning. A child might age 10 years in a week, while their parents remained young. The consensus reality dissolved. How does a society function when no two people agree on what today is? The collapse, when it finally arrived, was silent. It was a causal decoupling. The universe, unable to reconcile the billions of paradoxes generated by the constant slicing of timelines, simply ceased to compute the sequence. The civilization didn't explode, it became static. It stopped happening. The laws of physics in Sector 9 gave up. The ruins we explore today are not just empty, they are unfinished. We walk through buildings that are simultaneously under construction and in a state of advanced decay. We see statues that are half-carved block and half-eroded sand. It is a memorial to a war that broke the clock. Wind down. I am initiating the lockdown sequence on the containment unit. The humming of the blade has ceased, likely due to the dampening field engaging, but the sensation of unease remains. My watch is running 3 minutes slow, a lingering side effect of proximity. We must classify the Glass-Shard Claymore as a Class Omega relic. It is proof that while we can manipulate matter and energy, time is a structure we tamper with at our peril. We think of time as a river, vast and self-healing, but this object proves that time is actually glass. And if you strike it hard enough, it doesn't flow, it shatters, and we are left standing among the shards, bleeding from wounds that haven't happened yet.